My name is Mara Allison and I am 31 years old. When I was 7 years old, my father left on a Wednesday morning in February while I was at school. He didn't leave a note. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't call that evening or the next day or the one after that. He simply was there when I left for school in the morning and gone when I came home in the afternoon, and the space he left behind was so total and so sudden that for weeks afterward I kept expecting to hear his key in the lock. I stopped expecting it eventually. You learn to stop expecting things that don't come. I spent the next 24 years building a life on the foundation of a person who stayed, my mother who worked 2 jobs and never once made me feel like a burden, who showed up to everything and asked about everything and loved me in the loud, daily, inconvenient way that real love actually looks like. I became a structural engineer because I was drawn to things that held. To the science of what makes a structure stand when everything around it is trying to bring it down. I have spent my career calculating load and tension and the precise distribution of weight across systems that have to last. I have thought more than once about the irony of that. Last year, a new client came into our firm for a consultation. He was in his late 50s. Quiet, well-dressed, the kind of man who carries himself like someone who has learned to take up less space than he used to. My assistant showed him to the conference room and came to get me. I walked in, extended my hand, introduced myself. He looked at me. And the color left his face completely. He said my name. Not as a question. As a recognition. More. I had not seen my father since I was 7 years old. I was standing in my own conference room, in the firm I had built, in the career I had constructed from nothing, and my father was sitting across the table looking at me like a man who has just understood the full weight of every choice he ever made. What happened next? What I said, what he said, what I did with 24 years of a question I'd stopped letting myself ask. That is the story I'm going to tell you. But first I need to take you back. Because the conference room was not the beginning. The beginning was a Wednesday morning in February when a 7-year-old girl came home from school and stood in the hallway calling for someone who wasn't there anymore. Please like and subscribe before I go any further. Only if this is already sitting somewhere in your chest. Drop your location in the comments and tell me what time it is where you are. I want to know you're with me. Let me start at the beginning. My father's name was Daniel Ellison. I say was not because he died but because the man I knew, or believed I knew, or constructed in the years after he left from the fragments of memory available to a 7-year-old, belongs to a past tense that feels irreversible even now. What I remember of him before he left is the specific, impressionistic memory of early childhood. Not a continuous narrative but a series of images, each one lit with the particular brightness of things that were once ordinary and became precious only in retrospect. His hands. He had large hands, a carpenter's hands, rough at the knuckles and always slightly calloused. When he held my hand crossing the street, his fingers wrapped all the way around mine and a little further, and I remember the specific feeling of that containment, the sensation of being held by something larger than you, of being safe inside a grip. His laugh. He had a laugh that started slow and built. A quiet sound at first, almost reluctant, and then something genuine and full. I can still hear it if I try hard enough. It has faded at the edges over 24 years but the shape of it is still there. Saturday mornings. He made eggs on Saturday mornings. Scrambled, always scrambled, with too much butter and not enough salt and a specific messiness to the whole operation that drove my mother gently crazy. He let me stir. I stood on a step stool beside the stove and stirred the eggs while he stood behind me with his hand over mine on the pan handle, and the kitchen smelled like butter and toast and Saturday. These are the things I had. A 7-year-old's inventory of a father. What I understood of the larger picture, of what was happening between my parents in the months before he left, I understood only later in pieces assembled from things my mother told me carefully over the years and things I came to understand on my own as I got older. My parents had been struggling for a long time. My mother told me this when I was 16, sitting at the kitchen table with the directness she'd always used with me, the refusal to soften things into shapes they weren't. They had been unhappy together for years. There had been distance and silences and the particular erosion that happens when two people who once fit together stop fitting and don't know what to do about it. My father had been offered work in another city. A construction contract, significant, the kind of thing that was a genuine professional opportunity. He had taken it without fully discussing it with my mother. He had gone intending, or so he told himself, to come back when the contract was done. He did not come back. The contract ended and another began, and the distance became a life and the life became permanent, and at some point the gap between I'm coming back soon and I am not coming back closed without him ever formally crossing it. My mother did not tell me this when I was 7. When I was 7 she told me that Daddy had to go away for work and that it wasn't my fault and that he loved me very much. I believed the first part. I wanted to believe the second part. The third part, the "it wasn't your fault," I carried as a question for years, the way children carry things they've been told but not yet convinced of. I want to tell you about my mother before I go any further because this story is as much hers as it is mine. Alan Ellison, she kept his name, which I asked her about once when I was older, and she said simply that it was my name too and she wasn't going to be the one to make that complicated. Was 29 years old when my father left. 29 years old with a 7-year-old daughter, a mortgage, and a husband who had simply not come back. She went back to work full-time within the month. She had a degree in accounting that she'd set aside when I was born, and she picked it up again with the particular efficiency of someone who doesn't have the luxury of a slow re-entry. She got a job at a firm in our town. Within 3 years she was a senior accountant. Within 6 she was managing a team. She worked hard and she was present. Those two things together, sustained over the entire length of my childhood. I understand now what that cost. I didn't understand then. Children don't, which is perhaps as it should be. He came to everything. Every school event, every recital, every science fair and sports day and parent-teacher conference. She sat in the front row. She asked about my homework and my friends and the things that were bothering me with a consistency that communicated, every time, that I was the most important thing in the room. She never spoke badly about my father to me. This is the thing I've thought about most as an adult. The remarkable, costly restraint of it. She had every reason to, and she never did. When I asked about him, which I did regularly in the years immediately after he left, she answered carefully, honestly, without editorial. He had to go. He had made choices she didn't understand. She didn't know if he was coming back. He hoped he was well. That was it. No bitterness. No anger performed for my benefit. No using me as a receptacle for her grief. She just loved me instead. Loudly, daily, in the inconvenient way. I didn't understand what I had in her until I was old enough to see what I could have had instead. I asked about my father constantly until I was about 10. Where was he? Why hadn't he called? Did he know it was my birthday? Had he seen my report card? Did he think about me? My mother answered what she could and held what she couldn't with the steadiness I'd come to count on from her. By 10 I'd begun to understand that the answers I needed weren't available from my mother, because she didn't have them. The answers were with a man who had not chosen to provide them. And a 10-year-old's relationship with that kind of absence eventually reaches a point of exhaustion. The energy required to keep hoping runs out. I stopped asking. Not because I stopped wanting to know. Because the wanting had become a weight I couldn't carry and also do everything else. I was in 3rd grade with a science fair project to finish and friends I was navigating and a mother who needed me to be okay because she was working so hard to make okay possible. I didn't have room for the grief of an absent father on top of all of that. So I put it somewhere. Not gone. Just set down. In the internal room that people build for the things they can't deal with right now and will get to eventually. I got to it in therapy at 25. Over the course of 2 years I opened that room and went through what was in it and learned to carry it properly. Not on top of everything else but integrated into the person I'd become, part of the weight I moved through the world with rather than the thing I was pretending wasn't there. I came out of that process with a clearer understanding of a few things. My father had left. That was real and it had caused damage and the damage was allowed to matter. He had also been a young man in a difficult situation who had made a series of choices that compounded into an absence he might or might not have intended to be permanent. That was also real. People were not always only what their worst choices said about them. I didn't need to find him. I didn't need his explanation or his apology to continue living my life. I was living it already, building it steadily, and it was good. But I also didn't need to pretend the question was gone. It wasn't gone. It was just not the loudest thing in the room anymore. I became a structural engineer because of a bridge. When I was 12, a bridge in our county needed repairs and the road was closed for 3 months while work was done. I walked past the construction site every day on my way to school and I became, over those 3 months, quietly obsessed with what was happening. Not the machinery, the thinking behind the machinery. The reason a bridge stood at all. The calculation involved in distributing weight across a span of space. In designing something that could bear load without failing. in understanding the precise relationship between what a structure was asked to carry and what it was built to hold. I started reading about it. My mother, who had learned early to feed whatever I was genuinely curious about, brought me books from the library without my asking. I read them the way some kids read novels, urgently staying up too late, annoyed when I had to stop. By high school I knew what I was going to study. By 23 I had an engineering degree. By 26 I had a master's and a position at a firm doing exactly the kind of work I'd imagined. Infrastructure, bridges, the large-scale systems that held things together. By 28 I had co-founded my own consultancy with a colleague named Derek, a firm that specialized in structural assessment and rehabilitation, going into existing structures, understanding why they were failing, designing interventions that would make them last. I have thought, as I said, about the irony of that. A girl whose primary structure failed when she was 7 years old. Who spent her career learning how to make things hold. The firm was small at first. 3 people, a leased office, more ambition than capital. By the time I was 31 we had 11 people, a reputation in the region, and a client list that had grown steadily through referrals from work we were genuinely proud of. I was by any measure doing well. I had my mother's voice in my head always. Not literally, but in the way that the people who built us become part of our internal architecture. Her particular brand of steady, present, unglamorous love had produced a person who knew how to show up for herself when no one else was going to, who understood that the work mattered regardless of who was watching, who had built something real from the material available. I was proud of what I'd built. I just didn't know, on the morning my assistant came to get me for a client consultation, that the consultation was about to show me how far I'd come from the place where everything had broken. It was a Tuesday in March. I had 2 consultations scheduled that morning. The first was a follow-up with an existing client, a municipality that had hired us to assess 3 aging pedestrian bridges. The second was a new client, referred by someone we'd worked with the previous year, looking for a structural assessment of a historic building they were considering purchasing. My assistant Maya came to my office at 10:15. Mr. Calloway is here for the 11 o'clock. He's a little early. Should I put him in the conference room? That's fine, I said. Offer him coffee. I'll be there in 10 minutes. I finished the email I was writing. Gathered the preliminary notes I'd pulled on the building in question. Straightened my jacket. A habit, the small ritual of preparation before a client meeting. I walked down the hall to the conference room. I opened the door. He was sitting at the far end of the table facing the window, a coffee cup in front of him. He turned when he heard the door. Late 50s. Gray at the temples, more gray than dark now. Broader in the shoulders than I would have expected, a working man's build. Well dressed in the way of someone who has learned to present himself carefully. He turned to face me and I saw his eyes, and something happened in my chest that I didn't immediately have a name for. A recognition that preceded understanding. The way your body sometimes knows something before your mind has processed it. I extended my hand. Mr. Calloway. I'm Mara Allison. Thank you for coming in. He stood. He took my hand. He looked at my face. And the color drained from his completely. He said my name. Not Miss Ellison. Not a professional greeting. More. The way you say a name you've been saying privately for a very long time. I stood completely still. I looked at this man. This stranger, this client, this person I had never met, and something assembled itself in the space between one breath and the next. The hands. Large, rough at the knuckles, calloused. The eyes. A particular shade of gray-green that I had not seen since I was 7 years old but recognized immediately, with the unreasonable certainty of bone-deep memory. More. My father was sitting at my conference table. I need to stop here. Because I need a moment, and I think you might too. If you're watching this, if you've ever had a moment where something you stopped waiting for walked through a door, drop something in the comments. Anything at all. I just need to know you're there. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please do it now. Because what I did in the next 10 minutes of that meeting, what I said and what I chose, I've thought about every day since. Type Mara in the comments if you're still with me. I want to tell you exactly what happened in the 10 minutes after I recognized him, because I've been asked about it many times and I want to be precise. I did not cry. I did not leave the room. I did not say, "Do you know who I am?" or "How dare you?" or any of the things that might have been understandable, that a person would have forgiven me for. I sat down. I set my notes on the table in front of me. And I said in the voice I use for client meetings, calm and professional, "I think we should acknowledge what's happening here before we go any further." He was still standing. He sat down slowly like a man whose legs have become uncertain. Yes, he said. His voice was rough. Yes, I think we should. You recognize me? Yes. He looked at his hands on the table. I had no idea. The referral was from Jack Osman and he just gave me the firm name. I didn't know. He stopped. Maura. Not yet, I said. He looked up. I need a minute, I said. Please. He was quiet. I sat with the information. My father. 58 years old, gray at the temples. Sitting across my conference table on a Tuesday morning in March because a mutual professional contact had sent him to my firm for a structural assessment. 24 years. I had been 31 years old for 3 months. I had been 7 years old the last time I saw this man's face. I thought about the conference room. About the notes in front of me. About the 11 people in the office outside this door who were working on things that mattered because I had built something real. I thought about my mother at 29, going back to work with a 7-year-old and a mortgage. I thought about Saturday mornings and scrambled eggs and a hand over mine on a panhandle. I looked at him. I'm not going to do the work for you, I said. I'm not going to ask the questions and make it easier. If you want to say something to me, you're going to have to find the words yourself. He nodded. He looked at his hands for a long moment. Then he looked at me. You look like her, he said. Your mother. Around the eyes. He paused. But the way you just handled that, the way you just sat down and got steady, that's not her. I don't know where that came from. It came from me, I said. Yes, he said quietly. I imagine it did. Pause. I'm sorry, he said. I know he stopped. I know that's not enough. I know it's so far from enough it barely counts. But I need to say it first. I left. I should not have left. I should not have stayed away. There is no version of the story where what I did was acceptable, and I have known that for 24 years. I held his gaze. Why did you stay away? I said. After the contract. When you could have come back. He was quiet for a long moment. Because I had been gone long enough that coming back felt like an intrusion, he said. I told myself your mother had built something without me and I would only disrupt it. I told myself you were better off. He paused. I know now that was a story I told myself to make the cowardice feel like sacrifice. I was afraid. I was ashamed of how long I'd let it go. And I kept letting it go because the longer it went the more ashamed I was, and the more ashamed I was the harder it felt to come back. You could have called. Yes. You could have written. Yes. You could have done something, anything, in 24 years. Yes. His voice was stripped of everything. I could have. I should have. I didn't. I have no defense for that. The conference room was very quiet. Outside I could hear the ordinary sounds of the office. Keyboards. A phone ringing. Derek's voice down the hall talking to a client. My ordinary Tuesday. Why are you here now? I said. Not in this conference room. I understand the referral. Why are you in this city? Why now? He was quiet for a moment. I moved back 6 months ago, he said. My mother died, your grandmother, and I came back for the funeral and He stopped. I couldn't leave again. Something about coming back and being here. I couldn't make myself go again. He paused. I've been trying to find the right way to reach out to you for 6 months. I didn't know how. I didn't know if you'd want to hear from me. And then Jack gave me this referral and I didn't know it was your firm and I walked in and... He stopped. And there you were, he said. And there I was, I said. I did not schedule the structural assessment that day. I told him honestly that I needed time before I knew what I wanted to do with what had just happened, and that the professional matter could wait or he could find another firm if he needed it done sooner. He said he would wait. I showed him out. Professionally, without coldness, without warmth. The way you close a meeting that has exceeded its original parameters and needs time to find its new ones. I went back to my office and closed the door. I sat at my desk for a while. Then I called my mother. She answered on the second ring. She always answered quickly when I called midday, understanding instinctively that midday calls from me meant something had happened. Maura. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong, I said. I just need to tell you something. I told her. The silence on her end was the particular silence of someone absorbing information that is large and requires a moment to settle. Are you all right? She said finally. I think so. Yes. I paused. I don't know what to do with it. That's understandable. I think he wants to talk. Properly. He's been back in the city for 6 months. He said he's been trying to find a way to reach out. A long pause. How did he seem? She asked. And the question was careful, measured, the way she'd always been about him. Not protective of him, but not hostile either. Ashamed, I said. He seemed like a man who has been sitting with something for a very long time and ran out of room to keep sitting with it. My mother was quiet. What do you want to do? She said. I don't know yet. Then take the time to figure that out, she said. You don't owe him a quick answer. You don't owe him anything at all. Pause. But if talking to him is something you want to do, for yourself, not for him, then that's worth considering. For myself, I said. You've been carrying the question your whole life, she said gently. Even when you set it down. It was always there. Maybe this is the chance to get some answers. Not because he deserves to give them. Because you deserve to have them. I sat with that. I love you, I said. I love you too, sweetheart. Pause. Call me later. I will. I hung up. I sat at my desk in the ordinary Tuesday afternoon of my ordinary office and thought about a 7-year-old girl standing in a hallway calling for someone who wasn't there. About what she deserved. About what I deserved now. I want to tell you about Claire Vasquez because she is the person I called after I called my mother, and she is the person who said the thing that helped me most. Claire and I had been friends since graduate school. We'd been in the same cohort, had survived the same brutal first year, had become the kind of friends who can say the true thing to each other without cushioning it because the relationship is strong enough to hold honesty without cracking. She was a civil engineer working for a city infrastructure department. She was one of the sharpest people I knew and also one of the funniest, which is a combination I'd learned to value above most things. I called her that afternoon and told her the whole thing. She listened without interrupting, which was unusual for Claire. She was an interrupter, a filler of pauses. So her silence throughout told me she understood the weight of it. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Okay, she said. Can I tell you what I actually think? That's why I called you. I think you already know what you want to do, she said. I think you want to talk to him. Not because you're forgiving him, you don't have to forgive him to want answers. Not because you owe him anything, you don't. But because the question has been there your whole life and he's sitting in your city with the answers and you're a person who calculates load-bearing capacity for a living. She paused. You're not going to walk away from an unsolved structural problem just because it's uncomfortable. I was quiet. That's a very engineering way to think about it, I said. You're a very engineering kind of person, she said. I mean that as a compliment. I know you do. Talk to him, she said. On your terms. In your time. But talk to him. Get what you came to get, which is the answers. And then decide from there. I thought about what she'd said. You're not going to walk away from an unsolved structural problem. She wasn't wrong. I called him 2 weeks later. 2 weeks in which I thought carefully about what I wanted from a conversation with my father, what questions I actually needed answered, what I would do with the answers when I had them. I called him on a Thursday morning and said, I'm willing to meet. One time, coffee, neutral location. An hour. I'm not promising anything beyond that. He said, okay, whatever you want. Wherever you want. I'll be there. We met at a coffee shop 3 blocks from my office. My choice, my territory, my timeline. He was already there when I arrived. Early again. He was sitting with his hands around a cup and he looked up when I came in with the expression of someone who has been rehearsing something and is no longer sure any of the rehearsed things are right. I sat down across from him. I got straight to it. I have questions, I said. I want to ask them and I want real answers. Not the version that makes you feel better. The real ones. Yes, he said. Whatever you want to ask. Did you think about me? He looked at me steadily. Every day, he said. Not as an excuse. Just, yes. Every single day. Then why didn't you call? I told you in the conference room, he said. Shame. Cowardice. The compounding weight of time. He paused. None of those are good reasons. I'm not offering them as justifications. They're just the truth. Did you know it was hurting me? Pause. I told myself it wasn't, he said quietly. I told myself your mother was doing a remarkable job, which she was, and that you had everything you needed, which you did, and that my absence was more absence than presence, that I'd become theoretical, that bringing myself back would only disrupt something that was functioning. He held my gaze. I knew that was partially a story I was telling myself to make the cowardice livable. I knew it wasn't the full truth. The full truth was that a 7-year-old girl came home from school and you were gone and nobody explained it to her properly for years. Yes, he said. That's the full truth. She asked about you constantly, I said. For 3 years she asked. Every birthday she wondered if you knew it was her birthday. Every achievement she wondered if you would have been proud. He closed his eyes briefly. Opened them. I know, he said. I'm sorry. I know sorry doesn't touch it. But it's all I have. I looked at my coffee. What were you proud of? I said. You said in the conference room that you'd moved back to the city 6 months ago. That you'd been trying to figure out how to reach out. Which means you knew where I was. Which means you'd been following what I was doing from a distance. I looked at him. What did you know? What were you proud of? He was quiet for a moment. I knew you went into engineering, he said. I found that out when you were in college. Your grandmother mentioned it in a letter. When I heard that He stopped. I don't know why. Something about it felt right. Like you'd found the thing you were meant for. She told you things. Your mother. She stayed in loose contact with your mother. Not much. Christmas cards occasionally. She sent me information sometimes without my asking. He paused. I think she was trying to keep the door open even when I wasn't walking through it. I thought about a grandmother I'd never known. Who'd kept a door open from a distance. She died in the fall, he said. She never stopped hoping I'd reach out to you. She told me that in the last few months. She said she was embarrassed by my cowardice and that she wanted me to fix it before she died. His voice was rougher now. I didn't fix it in time for her to see it. I'm trying to fix it now. The coffee shop was busy around us. Ordinary Tuesday sounds. People with ordinary problems and ordinary lives and no idea that 24 years of history were being unpacked 2 tables away. At the conference, I said. You said you were proud of me. He looked at me. You said something when you walked in. You looked at me and you said, I said I was proud of you, he said. I know. I didn't plan to say it. It came out. He paused. I'd walked past this firm's building for weeks since I moved back. I knew the name. I knew it was yours. And I'd been trying to work up the courage to come in and I couldn't. And then Jack gave me the referral and I thought maybe the universe was doing what I couldn't make myself do. He met my eyes. And then you walked into that conference room and you were. He stopped. You were this person. This complete, capable, accomplished person who had built something extraordinary and you were my daughter and I had done nothing, to help build any of it. The word sat between us. My daughter. You don't get to claim that, I said. Not unkindly. Just precisely. You don't get to feel pride in what I built as though it reflects on you. You weren't there. What I built without you. That belongs to me and to my mother and to everyone who actually showed up. He flinched. Just slightly. You're right, he said. I know you're right. What you can feel, I said slowly, is something else. Something that isn't pride because pride implies contribution. Maybe just witnessing. Seeing what happened in the space you left. He was quiet for a long time. Yes, he said finally. That's more accurate. We sat with that for a moment. Can I ask you something? He said. Yes. The engineering, he said. Structural assessment. Why that specifically? Of all the things in engineering, I looked at him. Because I was interested in what makes things hold, I said. What keeps structures standing when everything around them is trying to bring them down? I paused. I've thought about the irony of that. He looked at me for a long moment. I'm sorry I wasn't one of the things that held, he said. You weren't, I said. But some things were. And those things were enough. I want to tell you about the conversation I had with my mother the evening after the coffee meeting. I drove to her house. She still lived in the same town where I'd grown up. A smaller house now, just hers, the one she'd moved to after I left for university. She'd planted a garden in the back that she tended with the same steady care she'd applied to everything else in her life. She was in the kitchen when I let myself in. She looked at my face and said nothing, just poured 2 glasses of wine and set them on the table and sat down. I sat across from her. I told her everything. The whole meeting, question by question, answer by answer. The things he'd said that were true and the things that were inadequate, and the moment when he'd said my daughter and I told him he didn't get to claim that. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. How do you feel? She said. Like I've been carrying a backpack I didn't know was heavy, I said. And I just got to put it on the ground for the first time and look at what's in it. She nodded. Does it help? She said. Having some answers? Some of them, I said. The ones that are real. He was ashamed and afraid, and he let time compound the problem until it felt irreversible. That's not a good reason. It's not a justification. But it's a human reason. I can understand it even while knowing it was wrong. She wrapped her hands around her wine glass. I want to tell you something, she said. That I've never told you. I looked at her. I was angry at him for a long time, she said. Not just for leaving. For leaving you. For making you one of the children who grows up with that question. She paused. I worked very hard for a very long time to make sure the anger didn't touch you. To make sure you had room to form your own understanding of him in your own time. You did, I said. You never said anything bad about him. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, she said plainly. Harder than the mortgage and the 2 jobs and all of it. Because I was furious, Mara. I was furious for years. I looked at this woman. 60 years old now. Gray at the temples and fine lines at the corners of her eyes, and the particular calm of someone who has done hard things for a long time and knows the shape of her own strength. Why didn't you tell me? I said. When I was older. When I could have understood. Because it wasn't my anger to give you, she said. Your feelings about your father were yours to develop. I wasn't going to color them before you had a chance to figure out what they actually were. I looked at her for a long moment. You are the most remarkable person I know, I said. She smiled. The particular smile she had, small, certain, the one that said, stop, I'm just a person. I'm your mother, she said. I was just doing what mothers do. No, I said. You were doing what the best ones do. There's a difference. She reached across the table and put her hand over mine. We sat like that for a while. The kitchen was warm. The garden was dark outside the window. The wine was good. My mother, who had held everything together for 24 years with the kind of unglamorous, consistent, daily love that doesn't get celebrated enough. I thought about structural engineering. About load distribution. About the way a well-designed system holds what it's asked to hold, not through one dramatic element but through the quiet, sustained, reliable performance of every part doing its job. My mother had been doing her job for 31 years without a single day off. That was the structure that held. That was why I was standing. I saw my father 3 more times in the 6 months that followed. Not frequently. Not with the warmth that would have been possible had things been different. But with an honesty that I found gradually to be its own kind of value. The second meeting was a walk. An hour in a park near my office. He told me about his life, the work he'd done, the places he'd been, the years of it. Not as justification. Just as the filling in of a gap. The life that had happened in the space where he should have been. I listened. I asked questions. I kept my own counsel about what I felt. The third meeting was at a project site. He'd asked carefully if I'd be willing to show him something I'd worked on. I said yes, understanding that it was his way of trying to witness rather than claim, to see the work rather than take credit for the person. I walked him through a bridge rehabilitation project. Explained what had been failing and why, what we'd done to address it. What the structure would now be able to hold that it couldn't before. He listened with the particular attention of someone who understands structural work and is also listening to something else underneath it. At the end he said, "You're very good at this." "I know," I said. He smiled. Just slightly. "You get that from somewhere," he said. "I get it from myself," I said. "And from my mother, who built her own structural assessment business, basically out of accounting and willpower." He nodded. "She was always the strongest person in any room," he said. "I think I was afraid of that back then. I'm not proud of it." "You should tell her that," I said. "Not for her sake. She's fine. But because it's true and true things should be said." He looked at me. "Do you think she'd want to hear from me?" "I think she's been where she needed to be for a long time," I said. "But I think she's also a person who deserves acknowledgement for what she did. If you want to give it to her, you should." He called her. She told me about it afterward, matter-of-factly, the way she handled most things. He apologized, she said. Properly. Not to get anything. Just to say it. How did that feel? She thought about it for a moment. Like something closing that had been open a long time, she said. Not healing. Just closing. Coming to its natural end. Good, I said. Yes, she said. Good. The fourth meeting was the one I want to tell you about properly. Part 12. The fourth meeting we met for dinner. His suggestion, my approval, a restaurant I chose. 6 months after the conference room. The most time we'd spent together. 2 hours, a full meal, the kind of conversation that requires more than a walk or a construction site. He told me about his mother. My grandmother, Ruth, who died in the fall. He talked about her for a long time, who she'd been, what she'd valued, the specific ways she'd expressed her disappointment in him over the years without ever cutting him off. She sent me a photo once, he said. This was maybe 10 years ago. A photo of you. I don't know where she got it. Probably your mother's mother, they were in touch occasionally. He paused. You were in your mid-20s. You were at some kind of professional event, standing at a podium. She wrote on the back, your daughter is doing the work you should have been there to see. I looked at him. She kept the door open, he said. Even when I didn't walk through it. She kept it open. I thought about Mrs. Callahan and a shoebox in an attic. About the people who keep things safe until the right moment. She sounds like someone I would have liked to know, I said. She would have loved you, he said. She did love you. Without ever meeting you. I think that's possible, to love the idea of someone who came from someone you love. We were quiet for a moment. Can I ask you something? I said. Yes. What do you want from this? I said. From these meetings. From whatever this is. I held his gaze. Not what you think you should want. What you actually want. He was quiet for a long time. I want to know you, he said finally. Not to be your father, I gave that up, I understand that. But to know who you became. To be someone in your life, even in a small way, even on whatever terms you set. He paused. I know I don't deserve it. I'm not asking because I deserve it. I'm asking because you are, because of who you are, I want to know you. That's separate from what I deserve. I sat with that. Outside the restaurant, the city moved in the ordinary way of cities. Indifferent, busy, carrying its 10,000 stories simultaneously. I thought about the structural work I did. About what it meant to assess a damaged structure. About the difference between a structure that had failed completely and one that had been damaged but still had integrity in its core. That could be worked with, reinforced, made to hold again if the intervention was carefully designed. Not everything that breaks is beyond repair. Not every structure that's been damaged is beyond saving. The question was always, what's the load? What's the integrity of what remains? What would the reinforced version actually be able to hold? I can't give you what would have been there if you'd stayed, I said. That's gone. 24 years of it is gone. I know. What I can offer, I said slowly, is the chance to build something new. Not a restoration. Something different. Something that exists in the present and isn't trying to be what it should have been. I paused. On my terms. Fully. With no promise of what it becomes. He looked at me. Yes, he said. Whatever you're willing to offer. That's more than I deserve and I know it. It's not about what you deserve, I said. It's about what I want for my own life. I paused. And what I want is to not spend the next 30 years carrying a question I had a chance to answer. He nodded. Something shifted in his face. Not relief exactly, something more complicated. The expression of a man who has been holding his breath for a very long time and has just, cautiously, let a little of it go. We finished dinner. I drove home. Franklin was on the couch. I sat beside him and he climbed onto my lap with the complete confidence of a dog who knows exactly where he belongs. I called my mother. How was it? She said. Good, I said. I think it was genuinely good. How do you feel? I thought about it properly. Like I've done something structural, I said. Like I've gone into a damaged thing and figured out what's worth saving and designed the intervention. I paused. It's not going to be what it would have been. But it might be something real. My mother was quiet for a moment. That sounds like you, she said. Always the engineer. Always, I said. My father and I have dinner once a month now. It is not the relationship that would have existed had he stayed. That one is gone. What we have instead is something that operates in the present, that doesn't pretend to recover what was lost, that builds forward rather than backward. He came to a project presentation last spring, a community meeting for a bridge rehabilitation in a neighborhood that had been fighting for the project for years. I stood up at the front of a community hall and presented the plan to a room full of people who had a stake in it, and I walked them through what we were doing and why and what the bridge would be able to hold when we were finished. He sat in the third row. After, in the parking lot, he said, "That's the third time I've seen you speak in front of people now. Every time I understand better what I missed." "You missed a lot," I said. "That's true." "Yes. But you're here now," I said. "That's different from nothing." He nodded. I drove to my mother's house for dinner afterward. Sunday dinner, which she hosted every week with the same steady commitment she'd brought to everything else in 31 years of showing up. She asked about the presentation. She asked about the project. She asked about Franklin, who had charmed her into treating him like a grandchild, which she would deny if asked. After dinner we sat on her back porch in the early summer dark and she said, "Are you happy, Mara?" "Actually happy." I thought about the question. The work. The bridge in the community hall with the neighborhood full of people who had a stake in it. Claire, who said true things and made me laugh. My mother's Sunday dinners. A dog named Franklin who knew exactly where he belonged. A man who came to presentations and sat in the third row and was learning slowly to witness rather than claim. A life I had built from the material available. A structure that held. "Yes," I said. "Actually happy." He squeezed my hand. The garden was dark around us. The night was warm. I was 31 years old and I had built something that held, and I was sitting on my mother's porch and I was actually genuinely, in the full and specific meaning of the word, home. If you grew up with an absent parent, if you know the particular weight of a question that never got answered, the low-grade hum of a door that was never properly closed, I want to say something to you directly. You are not defined by who left. You are defined by what you built in the space they left behind. The absence shaped you. I won't pretend it didn't. The things we survive become part of our architecture whether we choose them or not. But the shape of you, the particular structure of who you became, that was built by you. By the people who stayed. By the work you did. By the life you made from the materials available. That belongs to you. Not to the person who left. Not to the absence they created. Yours. And if that person comes back, if they walk through a door one Tuesday morning and the question you stopped asking is suddenly sitting across a conference table, you get to decide what to do with it. Not on their terms. On yours. You don't owe them forgiveness. You don't owe them a relationship. You don't owe them anything at all. But if there are answers you need, answers you deserve that have always been yours to have, you are allowed to take them. Not for them. For the 7-year-old who stood in a hallway and called for someone who wasn't there. She deserved answers. Thank you for being here until the very end. If this story moved you, please like this video. It helps more people find these stories. Subscribe with the notification bell. And tell me in the comments, have you ever had to build yourself from scratch after someone left? Have you ever had an unexpected door open that you thought was closed forever? I read every comment. Every single one. Until next time, build something that holds. You already know how.